Welcome in. Yes, welcome in. Yes, welcome in to State of the Nation, February 9th. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk, Josh Park, Zach Lang. Nation Dan is here as well. I guess I should point to everyone properly on the screen. I don't know if I'm doing that right. This whole live streaming thing, it's a ton of fun. We're live on Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter as well. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Hit us up in the comments if you have any questions as well. You can see our topics on the side right there. Going through the first quarter of the season, but before we do that, let's just, I'm going to ask everyone for the biggest takeaway on the game last night. I'll start with you, Nation Dan. What did you take away from that 3-1 win over the Sens?
Pretty brutal defensive game again, and we're getting let off the hook because we're playing the Ottawa Senators. But I think I counted roughly 5 times where we had a Senators player behind the defense, and Smith was able to make the save, and everybody was touting him for that. But you gotta tighten that crap up out of the game, or else we're gonna get burned when we play the Calgarys of the world, let alone the Leafs and the Habs. So yeah, for me, defensively, they're just not there yet, and they were lucky that they're playing the Ottawa Senators and not a good team.
I thought they were okay-ish defensively. There were some lapses, but I don't know. I'd forgive them for that in that one. Zach, what'd you take away from the win over Ottawa last night?
Mike, mute.
Your mic is muted. That's not even my fault. That's on you, Zach.
Oh, man, that's brutal. I hate when I do that. The joy of live streaming.
Dollar in the jar.
I think for me, my biggest takeaway, I wrote about it on my day after column this morning. I thought the Oilers played a full 60 minutes, and it was one of the first times that I think they've done that this season. And I think it's what led to the win. Tippett sounded really happy with the effort all around last night. We're starting to see some good stuff from our third and fourth lines as well. Jujhar Khaira, he obviously had the fight early in the game, but he was one of the better players out there last night, I thought. So those are the games the Oilers should be winning against a team like Ottawa, and it's going to bode well, hopefully, when they get back to playing the Montreals and Torontos here pretty soon.
That was a Senators team who was coming into that game with a couple of good wins under their belt, honestly, or a couple of good games. One good win and one where they almost beat the Habs again. So I was a little worried that was 2 points the Oilers were going to let slip. Josh Park, your biggest takeaway from last night?
I think it was the performance of Mike Smith. I think it was really satisfying to see him come in. You didn't know how he was going to respond after having an early injury in the season. Hasn't been in a game yet. We're already deep into the schedule. And it was satisfying to see him come in and just have a solid start for his first game. I thought it took a lot of the pressure off the defenseman, how easy he played the puck in the back end. And Dave Tippett has talked a lot about that, how it takes a lot of the load off the defenseman when you have Mike Smith in the game, just because he's so good at playing the puck. And we actually saw it a few times on creating rushes in the opposite way when he had those deep stretch passes going up the ice. So I loved Mike Smith's game. He's actually currently the NHL save percentage leader. So we have solved all our goaltending problems. Mike Smith, .964 save percentage.
That's a good segue into sort of the next topic here, because I want to talk a little bit about Mike Smith. Also, as you can see on the sidebar there, we're going to have Brody from OwnersBox coming up in just a little bit. So if you have any fantasy hockey questions, hit us up on Twitch or on the Facebook stream, and we can pass a few of them along to Brody. But Mike Smith, to me, I think the big thing last night was he made timely saves for this team. Like when they were down 1-0, he stops a breakaway. That's what you need from a goalie with this Oilers team. Nation Dan, your thoughts on Mike Smith last night?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily, again, it comes back to me for the defense, and it's just, overall it was a good game. I agree with the other guys there on saying that, but it's just those little lapses where, yeah, you get a save from Smith and you're happy about it. But if we're down 2-0, 3-0 because of those breakaways, people are probably mad at Smith at this point, and I don't think that that's necessarily fair, but he came up big in the crunch, and that's what you need from a goalie. And hopefully, when we start platooning these guys again where it's supposed to be, you're going to get that kind of effort from both of those guys.
Zach, is the return of Mike Smith, do you think that's going to help both the Oilers and specifically Mikko Koskinen? Like, do you think we'll get a little bit more from Mikko here now that he has his 1B, his partner, back?
Yeah, I think so. I think Mikko's been playing pretty good hockey all season long. I think he's fallen victim to literally having to play almost every single game for the Edmonton Oilers up until last night, right? That wears on a guy. He's faced a hell of a lot of shots this season, and I think, for a guy like him, he could use a little extra rest between games and when he plays and stuff like that. So, I think hopefully in turn what we'll see happen is obviously Smith came in and had a great game last night, and we all know how up and down he can be at times as well. But if we can get some solid goaltending from these two down the stretch, who knows what can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, people like to shit on the fact that, Mike Smith was brought back once again. But for me, like, I didn't love the signing, I'll admit that. But the one area of it I did like those two guys had you competing for the top spot in the Pacific Division last year in the regular season. Like, why wouldn't you bring them back, right? Like, should we be surprised if the two of them work out again for another year?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So many people, I think, are caught up in the fact that, well, the Oilers were really targeting Jacob Markstrom in the offseason, and when they fell back, they didn't necessarily have a plan B. But at the end of the day, like you said, Tyler, their plan B was Mike Smith, which almost got the Oilers. They were near first in the division when the league stopped last March. So, Mike Smith is one of those guys. He's a battler. He's got all the buzzwords around him, good in the room and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But I think he's a solid enough goaltender still.
Well, and this is an entirely different conversation if we get a better effort from either of the goalies in the play-in round, right? Like,
yeah.
It's just even if it was a loss, but we're not hanging that loss on both goalies, it's a different conversation altogether. So yeah, I mean, you can come to expect, I think, average to good goaltending going forward with these two.
Spank Yeg in the Twitch chat says, how hot is Larson right now? Pucks are just going in off his stick and he can't stop it. The only shot that beat Mike Smith was one that they came off the stick of Adam Larson. The other takeaway I had from Smith's game, like, the puck moving is good and it's an asset, but as a fan, it scares the shit out of me, man. Like, he gets wandering out there. Like, I think there was one in the first period where he was almost at the blue line coming out to play a puck, and it's just like, I love it when it works, but I'm already preparing myself for, like, in his second or third start, there's going to be the moment it doesn't.
Well, you take it where you can and you leave it where you can. Like, me as a fan, I absolutely love it. Like, I remember on that one play from the broadcast camera angle, we saw the puck go into the blue line. We knew there was no Oilers defense back. And I literally, the little part inside of me was like, Smith's going to come out and play it, isn't he? And then all of a sudden, you see big number 41 come barreling into the camera, and he's right there to meet the puck, and that would have been a clear breakaway. Like, he would have had 15 feet to the net, and it would have been a wide open opportunity. So, for me, obviously, it's the good with the bad. It's kind of a lesser of two evils with that, because obviously every once in a while you're going to see Mike Smith give up an absolute dumpster goal. But I love it. I love the puck moving ability. I think it takes some of the load off the defenseman, and I just think it adds a new element to the game, and it's a new look for the Oilers. Very, very different, obviously, than Mikko Koskinen. So I loved it. I was very happy last night.
Another big takeaway from last night's win was the fourth line, and that Ennis, Archibald, and Caroline. They were really, really good, and I tweeted out that it was Ennis's best game of the year before he even got a goal, and he ends up finding the back of the net as well. Huh? How about that from me? But that fourth line was great. It's now been back-to-back games where they've gotten depth scoring. Dan, that's huge. Like, to me, like, the defensive stuff last game was a worry, but they got depth scoring and good goaltending. They haven't been getting that very often this year.
It was almost as good of a call, Tyler, as calling the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the money line ahead of the game. Cha-ching. But yeah, it's. I think that it's something that is just, it's refreshing, and it's fun to have that element again, and yeah, I don't know, it's just he's a guy that I think has proven last night and every time he's in the game that he doesn't really belong on the taxi squad. We were lucky to get him through that waiver wire. Now with the injury issues that are creeping up again with Gaetan Haas and Zach Kassian both on the IR, but yeah. You love to see that kind of effort from a guy, especially in his homecoming of sorts, going back to the city that he left and doing it there in front of the home crowd. Just can't wait to see Tyson Barrie do the same thing to the Leafs here, I hope.
Yeah, hopefully. And big game against Montreal coming up on Thursday as well. But 2 points still on the line tonight against Ottawa. These are not points you want to let slip. Looking at the Oilers lineup, it sounds like Chason's going to go in for Kassian. Other than that, the forward group's going to stay the same. On the blue line, I'll come to you on this one first, Josh. I think the right side, we can kind of expect it's going to be Barrie, Larson, and Bouchard. The left side's going to have Nurse. Would you make any changes down there? I know we're hearing Russell might not be healthy, but would you make any changes? Would you put in Jones or Cuckoo tonight?
I think in tonight's game, I don't think it would be really an issue to take out Russell and put in Kukoc or Jones. I think Caleb Jones, being a young guy, Obviously, you're not going to have him sent down to the taxi squad, or more so, not going to have him sent down to Bakersfield. So you want to get him in games. He's still a very young guy, very similar to Evan Bouchard, and I would argue even similar to Ethan Bear at this point. Obviously, Bear still struggling through some injury right now, but I think with Caleb Jones, you just want to get him in games. So I would have no problem with taking out Russell tonight and getting him on the left side.
Yeah, I would also. I would take out both Lagesson and Russell, and I would put in Cuckoo and Jones here tonight. I think you got to get them games. You don't play this weekend. If you want your best lineup against Montreal, you got to give guys some reps tonight against Ottawa. Dan, what would you do on the blue line tonight?
Yeah, I think Lagesson had a good debut there, but last night wasn't his best effort. So yeah, I think you give them both a shot there, especially against Ottawa. Again, it's we talked about it last week when they had the 7 defensemen going. You don't necessarily have to put your best lineup out there. As long as they all play a good team game, you should be able to win the game every time. And again, we talked about it when we talk about the Habs losing to the Senators and the Leafs losing to the Senators. That's two good teams that don't have those 2 points on the board. We keep winning these games against the Senators. That's going to come up big at the end of the season when the point percentage could be the thing that we're looking at.
Yeah, no, I agree. These are games that we got to win here against the Senators and points that we need in the standings. After last night's games and coming into tonight, the Oilers are a playoff team, whether you look at just points in the standings or whether you look at points percentage. So these are the games the Oilers need to win to help get a better chance at making the playoffs. We're all seeing how tight it is right now in that middle of the pack, and quarter way through the season, we still got a lot of hockey left to go. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of happens down the stretch here.
We're at the 25% mark of the season here, so I figured it's a good time to just sort of take a look back at both the positives and the negatives from the first 14 games of the year. And we're going to start with our positive surprises so far. And I'll come to you. I'm coming right back to you, Zach. On a positive note, who's been the biggest surprise for you on this Oilers team?
Jesse Puljujarvi, I think. He came into the year, we didn't really know what we were going to get out of him. We didn't know if we were going to have the Jesse Puljujarvi of 2 seasons ago, and he's come back to Edmonton, and he's a completely different player. He's playing way more engaged, he's playing physical, and he's putting up points now, which is great to see. And it looks like he's got a line mate in Connor McDavid, and I don't think those two guys are going to get split up anytime soon.
Everyone talks about, the blender and all that, how you need to give time for guys to develop chemistry. This Oilers top 6 has remained constant now for 8 games, 7 games, something around there. It's been great to see. I agree with Zach. Jesse Puljujarvi, absolutely the biggest surprise here. I was thinking third line guy who would maybe just chip in some offense, but as long as he's out there, it's kind of like a good step forward. I didn't see this coming. Dan?
Me, it's the fact that he gave him absolutely at the top of his game almost every night. You can count on him. I know he had a good season last year towards the end of the season, but I think myself, I expected a little bit of a drop off and maybe even not being on that line the whole time because the Draisaitl-Kahun experiment is continuing. But for me, Yamamoto's absolute honey badger kind of attitude, you just love to see it, and this team needs that. There is nights where the team can take a shift off here or there. Yamamoto isn't that guy. So for me, it's the consistency that Yamamoto has shown now over basically an entire season.
Coming into the year, I was sort of telling people, don't expect too much from Kyler Yamamoto. He was almost at a point per game in his first little stretch here in the regular season last year, and I was like, that's a small sample size. If you're expecting him to be point a game again and really be that impact top 6 guy, you might be disappointed. But I sold him short this year. No pun intended. I should have expected this again from Yamamoto because everything that he does well is effort-based. So I love that you bring up Yamo. Josh, the biggest positive surprise through 14 games on the Oilers?
I think it's got to just be the newfound depth that this team has. I think an issue the Oilers have struggled with a lot over the last few years is just, depth on the right side on defense, depth in the bottom 6, and so many issues that would arise, especially late into the season when we'd have injuries. Of course, we're still early in this season, and I don't want to say that, our depth guys are absolute superstars, but it's just a new added level of flexibility for Dave Tippett where he can be pulling guys in and out of the lineup. You can insert a guy like Tyler Ennis, who hasn't played in a few games, and he can have that sort of impact last night. And then especially on the back end, I think that's just a testament to how good these young guys are playing for the Oilers. Willie Lagesson, Ethan Bear, Evan Bouchard, Caleb Jones. There's so much added flexibility for this team, especially on defense this season. And I think that's really kind of been the difference so far.
Zach, you'll remember the old Oilogosphere joke of the leftorium. how everything was lefty, right?
Oh, yeah.
And now, like, Josh brings up a good point. Now we're at a point where you're sitting there being like, okay, which good NHL right shot defenseman needs to be scratched tonight? I know it's easy because Bears hurt, but like they legitimately have 4 NHL caliber right side D-men.
I know, it's crazy. There was a presser the other day with Tippett where they were talking about which right side defenseman are you going to ask to play on the left side, and for literally the last decade it's been the other way around. So it was kind of weird to rack my brain around it. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. You know, the Oilers really have 7 or 8 NHL quality defenseman right now. I think William Lagesson has been fantastic to start the year for the Oilers. He plays a really calm, cool, collected game too, just like all the other guys. Evan Bouchard, I mean, come on, he's looked tremendous so far in the first 2 games. Let's not try to overreact here, right? But, you know, he's doing everything right. He makes the right reads. He's really calm out there, and that's what you want to see out of a guy like him. So it's a good problem to have, honestly.
On the flip side of this question, it's maybe what's been the most disappointing part of this season through 14 games. For me, like, there are some interesting candidates. Like, Mikko Koskinen would be one, but he was kind of, you know, thrown into the fire here, having to play every game. So I have a tough time saying Mikko Koskinen. For me, I think I still might say, I know it's top 10 in the NHL, but the power play has been a little bit disappointing. There's been too many games where it's coming up empty for me. So my answer to this one is the power play production. Still just, they need to find a way to get more. I want them top 5 in the NHL, so that's been a little bit disappointing for me. Nation Dan, the most disappointing part of the first 14 games.
Well, yeah, I would have said power play as well, but I'll go the other side of the coin. The special teams penalty kill has just been lost. And you know, they get lucky last night. Did they have 1 penalty against? And it was that Larson weird one.
And the Nuge penalty where he broke his stick, looked at his stick, and the ref said, "Don't even fucking look at your stick. You're going to the box."
Yeah, and so but for me it's like that, this team, you know, when you can just, like you said, Tyler, you know, count on that power play to score you goals, and also not be worried to play that physical edge kind of game that some of our bottom 6 guys can do. When you remove that ability, because the penalty kill just cannot be counted on right now, it's frustrating to watch. And so, you know, they gotta tighten that up. I don't know what it's going to take to change it. I have to go back and watch some footage of last year's penalty kill and see what changed. But yeah, for me it's the penalty kill for
Josh,
sure.
Most disappointing part of the start to the year for the Oilers?
Am I allowed to say the stubbornness of Dave Tippett?
Why is that disappointing?
I feel like there's just been a few different moments this season with the lineup changes and some of the decisions. You know, I was heavy on them scratching Neil a few games ago. Like, that set me the wrong way. I don't know if maybe Neil was a little bit banged up. They just wanted to give him a break. And, you know, maybe not getting Evan Bouchard into the lineup as early as they did. And, you know, there was that game against Toronto where they didn't call the timeout. And there's just been a few moments this season that Dave Tippett has made some calls that have left me with a lot to be desired. I don't want to harp on it too much, obviously, because I don't want to say that they were monumental decisions or anything like that. But I would also say, on top of that, I would just say the lack of emotion in certain moments by this team. And that's going to mostly lie on guys like Zach Kassian, where we saw it come out last night. Obviously, some unfortunate circumstances with what happened to him. But I would say the lack of emotion by some of the players where you need that type of emotion for them to be effective, I would say that would probably be the most disappointing thing
Zach,
for me.
what's your take on the most disappointing side of the Oilers start?
Well, I mean, I agree with all you guys on all of them. To go a little bit off the board, though, I'm going to go with a slow start to the season. I mean, the Oilers came out and looked really, really flat in the first 3 or 4 games to start the year, and I think that was a huge issue for the team. And for me, it was pretty disappointing. You know, the Oilers obviously had such a poor play-in tournament last August here in Edmonton, getting the first-round exit at the hands of Chicago. So I really thought the Oilers were going to come out with more jump in their game here to start the season. Obviously, things turned around a little bit, and that's great to see, but that would have to be my answer.
Oilers taking on the Senators here tonight, and before we get to Brody Schnarr from OwnersBox, let's go around and do a round of score predictions, boys. Dan, what do you think we're seeing tonight?
I'm gonna say 4-0 Edmonton.
4-0 Edmonton. Zach, yourself?
I'm gonna go with another 3-1 win.
Another 3-1 win. Josh Park, what are you thinking here?
5-2 Oilers.
5-2 Oilers. It's Marcus Hogberg in net, so I'm eyeing up that Oilers puck line that I think is still paying positive money. I think the Oilers are going to win by a few. I'm going to go ahead and say it's a big night. I'm going to go ahead and say 6-2 for the Oilers. Just going to get things set up here for Brody Schnarr from OwnersBox. What's up, Dan?
We are cocky. We love it. We're cocky. We're playing the Senators. We got some swagger in the fan base. It's good. It's good.
Let's bring in Brody Schnarr now from OwnersBox. Brody, how's it going, man?
Good, man. How are you guys doing today?
Oh, we're feeling good here in Edmonton with the win last night. But I mean, wins against the Senators. Is that a good way to look at your OwnersBox lineups here? If you're going into a draft and you know like Matthews or McDavid have like 3 games coming up against the Ottawa Senators, like probably pretty good to prioritize them in the draft, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds bad, and sorry to all the Sens fans out there, but that's been one of my key strategies. Definitely, teams playing them or teams playing the Red Wings. Load up right now. Why not?
Absolutely. For the Oilers here, over the last little run, like Connor McDavid's been going on this crazy stretch where like it was a multi-point game pretty much every single night. Draisaitl's producing well. At the beginning of the year, you were pretty high on Leon Draisaitl, and I was kind of of the mindset like, I might take a guy like Matthews or maybe even Ovechkin ahead of him, but Draisaitl's been great. What have you thought about some of the fantasy performances from some Oilers so far this year?
Yeah. I was lucky enough to have second pick, and in one of my season-long leagues with buddies, I got a little chirped for maybe going with Draisaitl instead of McKinnon. I think McKinnon might have been the safer pick when you're talking to people, but it's so far so good for me on Draisaitl there. And I mean, looking at the Oilers, I think it's the same story year after year, where at least in recent years, where McDavid and Draisaitl are producing, and you just hope that some of that depth. The depth scoring comes through and starts producing as well from a fantasy perspective. And I'm sure as a fan, you guys are all sitting there hoping those two can get a bit of help and get going. But I think Barrie, from a fantasy perspective, Tyson Barrie's been right there, kind of a bit of a rebound from his time over with the Maple Leafs. And, Nuge I saw he was good on the first game against the Senators a few days ago. Mm-hmm. He's kind of point per game right around that level. So there's some fantasy prospects there. It's getting that depth scoring going.
Brody, for people in watching this stream, they're probably pretty heavy in the North Division. But can you identify any teams, like I'm thinking maybe Columbus, as like a poisonous team to stay away from that maybe players aren't watching on a week-to-week basis?
Yeah, that Central has been that unique division for me, where I think it's a lot based on who you're playing. I mean, it's still early, and every year you see early on there's definitely more goals. I know that's a running joke in the gambling community that you bet all the overs the first few weeks in hockey, but it's definitely true. And then you kind of start to see it subside a bit, and I think we're kind of getting into that second stretch where teams are tightening up, teams are figuring out their systems, and you're starting to see those scores come down when you're taking the whole week into effect. So I think a Central Division, you've got some good goaltending and you've got some good teams. And on the surface, there's teams that can light it up. But when you're playing matchups against the Hurricane or Lightning, and Blue Jackets like to slow down the pace as well, as an example, I think you're hard pressed sometimes to have one of those real outbreak weeks, or breakout weeks, I should say, just because you've got some tougher defensive matchups.
Chatting some fantasy hockey with Brody from OwnersBox. If you don't know what OwnersBox is, go give it a Google search. Go check it out. But basically, it's like a hybrid between daily fantasy sports and your season-long stuff. It's weekly fantasy sports, so it gives you a chance to go through the exciting part of drafting a team, and then you basically skip right ahead to what would be like fantasy hockey playoffs. It's been a ton of fun. I've been doing a couple lineups every week pretty consistently here. But I want to talk goaltending specifically with you here, Brody. My perspective has always been that, you want to go ahead and take the best teams, just take their goalie and you'll be good. Has that kind of been true? Would that be a good strategy, or has maybe a guy like John Gibson provided some value?
Yeah, I think on our format, and a lot of the ones that include saves, or your save percentage comes into effect. Some of those goalies on teams that maybe you don't expect as much from. There's still John Gibson's a perfect example of a guy that he faces shots regularly, and if they're a 500 team or slightly above when he's playing, you get that potential win equity while still getting a good floor, just because the expectations are high. He's one of the best goalies in the league. But overall, I'd say you're correct. There's definitely some examples this year where that hasn't been true. I know Leonard for the Golden Knights. Yeah. coming in, you knew he was going to split time with Fleury. Maybe he had a bit of an edge where you thought it might be a 60-40, but he's struggled out of the gates, or he was already out of the gates and has struggled since. So it's always I think matchup dependent for me. You like to get a goalie on a better team, but I don't think you're dead in the water if you get a guy like Gibson, who maybe doesn't have as much of a chance to win every single game, but he's going to compete and be there for you.
How much of a problem has the COVID cancellations been for you guys at OwnersBox? Like, and even just from the perspective of playing weekly fantasy sports, like, has it been difficult to sort of keep up with all that and go into a draft with the thought in the back of your mind that, like, hey, if I'm going to take this guy first overall, sort of what are the chances he's even going to play a couple games this week?
Yeah, I think it adds an element of strategy. It depends how you look at it. So I was heavy on board beginning saying, these divisions in the North, just it's reality right now with COVID. These are probably the teams that there's such little risk right now, and you think all the games are going to go through. And that definitely adds value to these players, knowing that if the Leafs have 4 games, you're pretty sure Matthews is playing all of them unless he gets injured. Where some of these teams in the Central, where you're getting some of the Southern states, unfortunately, you don't know. And that's part of the fun with the draft, I guess, part of the trouble too. But I know what we do on our system is we give people a free swap for any player that either gets injured or is out due to COVID. We do our best to update as soon as we get the notices from the NHL on canceled games and have everything in our system. So you'd get notified that one of your players isn't playing, and you can drop them for the next best available guy at that point.
Taking a look at our Twitch chat here, Matty Carr dropped in and said he basically said his least favorite part of long fantasy hockey leagues is the waiver wire. Says OwnersBox is tight. He likes getting the fresh start every week. Before we let you go, I want your take on one player in particular, Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's eventually going to work his way into the Jets lineup here. Is that a guy you'd keep an eye on from a fantasy perspective, or do you think he might just be a little bit too low down in the depth chart to start?
I think it's real tough to know what they're gonna do. I think Maurice will have his vision and he'll want to stick to it. And I know he's a coach that typically likes the guys that he knows he can rely and trust on. But I think Pierre-Luc Dubois is a talent. You want to give him a chance to go, and you want to when you just traded maybe 2 guys that what was happening for them in their own situation wasn't working for anyone, right? But it's 2 top end talents. Like Laine is only a few years removed from his incredible rookie year, and Dubois has been a player at this level who night in and night out you notice when you're watching when he's on. And I think he'll be just like anyone in that new environment. You're ready to go. You're ready to show yourself and prove what you can do. Where he would definitely be on my radar. I don't know how our projections will have him rated, and I don't know how other projections will, but I think that's a really good point, and someone that you should potentially target on our platform if you're getting into some of those deeper, 4-man, 8-man drafts, and maybe on the waiver wire in some of your season-long leagues for sure.
Brody, as always, man, appreciate the insight. Good luck this weekend.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on,
Brody.
guys.
There you go.
Have a good one, guys.
That's Brody Schnarr from OwnersBox joining us on State of the Nation. Chatting a little fantasy hockey. Always good to get that in the mix. Also, I got to throw in that little Oilers puck line bet in there. I'm loving that one. I think it's still plus money on most sports books. Josh Park, you and Jay are going to be doing the pregame show coming up here. What are you looking at tonight from a betting perspective for the Oilers Senators game?
Well, if I had money in my account, which I don't, I would take the Oilers minus 1.5. I am completely empty after the Super Bowl weekend that I had when I went 1 for 12 on betting, and then I had $10 in my account last night, so I put it all on Evan Bouchard plus 700 to score. He didn't score. So I have no money left in my account, so it's definitely sad boy hour for Josh. But if I did have money in my account, I would take the Oilers minus 1.5, and I would also take Draisaitl over 1.5 points.
Okay.
I have a feeling Draisaitl's going to have a good night tonight. So those would be the 2 I'm looking at. And then potentially the over as well, just considering, Koskinen coming back in the lineup. Not that Koskinen's been horrible, but obviously with Marcus Hogberg, he's terrible.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of goals.
Zach, what are you thinking from a betting perspective in this one?
Yeah, I already got a hammer down on Oilers minus 1.5 right now. I also took the Betway boost, so we got Oilers, Golden Knights, and Panthers all to win in regulation. So I like that. And I mean, it's hard to go against Connor McDavid over 1.5 points any game of the year, right? He was a bit quiet last night. His only point came on a an empty net goal. So I think he could have a real big night tonight, which is silly because he could have a big night every night. But I think that's what I'll be having.
Dan,
today.
Oilers over. Anyone to score? You got anything?
Nope. I save my bets for when I'm confident. And I'm not confident on anything tonight except the Oilers.
Fair enough. All right, that's going to do it for another run around State of the Nation. Shout out to Brody from OwnersBox for joining us. Shout out to everyone in the chat for chiming in as well. For Josh, Zach, and Dan, I'm Tyler Yaremchuk. Enjoy the game tonight.